Hello everyone, and welcome back. Tonight, we're settling into the world of medieval craftsmanship, specifically the life of a blacksmith. Not the romantic, heroic version you might see in films, but the real, exhausting, soot-covered reality of a man who spent his entire existence standing beside fire, breathing smoke, and shaping iron with his bare hands. This is a story of routine, of repetition, of a life defined by heat and hammer. Before we begin, if you enjoy this kind of content, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it genuinely helps you relax. And if you'd like, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. It's always lovely to know who's drifting off with us. Now get comfortable, adjust your pillow, let your breathing slow. Maybe turn on a soft fan for gentle background noise. We're going to ease into tonight's journey together, one calm sentence at a time. The Forge, a life sentence. You weren't born a blacksmith by choice. You were born into it. Your father was a blacksmith, and his father before him. The moment you could walk without stumbling into the fire pit, you became an apprentice. By age 6, you were officially your father's helper, which meant you were an unpaid worker with no rights and permanent soot stains on your face and hands. Your childhood wasn't spent playing. It was spent learning. Learning how to pump the bellows without stopping. Learning which coals burned hottest. Learning to hold tongs steady even when your arms shook from exhaustion. Learning to stay quiet when your father corrected you, which he did often, usually with sharp words and sometimes with a thrown tool. There were no holidays. The forge didn't rest, so neither did you. Someone always needed something. A broken plow blade, a cracked door hinge, a dull knife, a loose horseshoe. The work never stopped. By the time you were 10 years old, you already smelled like iron and smoke. Your hands were rough, your back ached, and you knew, deep down, that this would be your entire life. The forge became your world. You knew every stone in the floor, every crack in the walls, every tool by touch alone. The sounds became a language, the hiss of hot iron meeting water, the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil, the wheeze of the bellows pushing air into the coals. These sounds filled your days and echoed in your dreams. The physical toll. By your teenage years, your body had already begun to change in ways other boys hadn't. Your arms were thick and strong, but your back was starting to curve from leaning over the anvil for hours every day. Your shoulders ached constantly. Your knees creaked when you crouched. Every joint in your body popped and complained. Your hands told the story most clearly. Blisters covered your palms, layered like tree rings. Some were fresh and painful. Others had hardened into thick calluses. You'd lost fingernails more than once, crushed beneath a misplaced hammer or caught between hot tongs. Burns were so common you stopped counting them. Small ones, large ones, some that blistered and some that simply turned the skin black and numb. Cuts came frequently too. Sharp edges of iron, the bite of a file, the slip of a chisel. You wrapped them in scraps of cloth and kept working because there was no other choice. The forge didn't stop for injuries. Your father certainly didn't. Sleep brought no relief. Your muscles ached so badly that lying still was impossible. Your ears rang from hours of hammering. Your arms twitched with phantom movements, as if your body couldn't stop working even when you tried to rest. You learned to sleep lightly, always half aware, because sometimes someone needed emergency work in the middle of the night. You were growing, yes, but you were growing crooked, growing tired, growing into a body that felt decades older than it was. The smoke and darkness. The forge wasn't just hot. It was suffocating. Smoke filled the workspace constantly, thick and dark, carrying the smell of burning coal, heated metal, and sometimes charred leather or wood. There was no chimney, just a hole in the roof that let out some of the smoke, but never enough. Your lungs adjusted, or at least they had to. At first, the smoke made you cough until your chest hurt. Then it just became normal. You breathed it in with every breath, day after day, year after year. Your throat always felt scratchy. Your voice grew rougher. You coughed often, especially in the mornings,
bringing up dark phlegm that you learned not to think about too much. The workspace itself was dim. Light came from the forge fire and maybe a small window if you were lucky. Most of your work happened in shadows, lit only by the orange glow of heated iron. You learned to work by feel as much as by sight, judging temperature by color, knowing when metal was ready by instinct rather than measurement. Protective equipment didn't exist.
You had a leather apron to catch sparks, but it was stiff, heavy, and often singed. A rag tied around your face helped a bit with the smoke, but it got sweaty and uncomfortable quickly, so you often went without it. Your eyes stung. Your skin was always covered in a thin layer of soot and coal dust. Bathing was rare, and even when you did wash, you'd be dirty again within hours. This was your air. This was your light. This was the environment you spent 12, 14, sometimes 16 hours a day in, 6 days a week, for your entire working life. The tools and the rhythm. Your tools became extensions of your body. The hammer, worn smooth from thousands of swings, fit your hand perfectly because your hand had shaped itself around it. Your shoulder clicked every time you raised it now, a permanent reminder of repetitive motion. The tongs, awkward and hot, pinched your fingers regularly. The anvil, scarred and dented from years of use, rang with a specific pitch you'd recognize anywhere. The files, chisels, and punches each had nicked you at some point, leaving small scars across your hands and forearms. You cared for these tools meticulously. You sharpened them, oiled them, arranged them carefully each evening. Not out of love exactly, but out of necessity. If a tool broke, you couldn't work. If you couldn't work, you couldn't eat. It was that simple. The rhythm of work was constant. Heat the iron in the forge until it glowed the right color, cherry red, orange, yellow-white, depending on what you needed. Pull it out with the tongs. Place it on the anvil. Strike it with the hammer, again and again, shaping it gradually with each blow. Return it to the fire when it cooled too much. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Hours passed this way. Days, years. The rhythm never changed. Heat, strike, shape, cool, reheat, strike again. Your body moved automatically, muscle memory taking over while your mind drifted elsewhere, though never too far. One moment of inattention could mean a ruined piece or a serious burn. The customers and the demands. Everyone needed you, but no one truly appreciated you. The knight needed a new sword. You made it, spending days getting the blade just right, tempering it carefully, sharpening the edge. He paid you, nodded curtly, and left. No thank you. No acknowledgement of the skill involved. The farmer's plow broke. You repaired it, reinforcing the weak points, knowing it would break again because he used it carelessly. He paid you with a few vegetables and a promise of more later that rarely materialized. The miller needed new hinges for his grain store. The baker needed his oven door fixed. The shepherd needed a latch repaired. Everyone came to you with problems, expecting quick solutions and cheap prices. They acted as if your skill was common, as if anyone could do what you did. Could you just quickly became a phrase you learned to hate. Nothing was quick. Everything took time, materials, and effort. But customers didn't want to hear that. They wanted their problems solved immediately and inexpensively. Payment was inconsistent. Sometimes coins, sometimes goods, bread, ale, cheese, eggs. Sometimes just promises that may or may not be kept. You learned to negotiate, to insist on fair payment, but it was exhausting. You were a craftsman, not a merchant, but you had to be both to survive. And yet, you knew the truth. Without you, the village would struggle. Plows would stay broken. Gates would hang crooked. Knives would remain dull. Horses would go unshod. You were essential, even if no one said it aloud. War and peace. Ironically, your busiest and most profitable times came during war. When armies marched, they needed weapons. Swords, spearheads, arrowheads by the hundreds. They needed armor repaired. They needed horseshoes constantly. The forge burned day and night, and coins actually flowed. You were exhausted during these times, yes, but at least you ate well. Your debts were paid. You could afford better materials, better tools, maybe even a new leather apron. But when peace returned, so did poverty. Suddenly, no one needed weapons. The work shifted to household items: pots, pans, hinges, nails. Necessary work, certainly, but it paid much less. Customers haggled over every penny. You found yourself making hundreds of nails by hand, monotonous work that barely covered your expenses. You learned to save during the busy times, to store grain and salt away, because the quiet times could be desperately lean. You never said it aloud, but part of you almost missed the chaos of war, not for the violence, but for the steady work and fair payment it brought. The endless cycle. Your work was never truly finished. You completed one task and 3 more appeared. You fixed a gate hinge and someone's cartwheel broke. You finished a batch of nails and someone needed twice as many, but longer this time, and could you please start right away? You rose before dawn and worked until well after dark. Even on Sundays, supposedly a day of rest, someone inevitably appeared with an urgent problem that couldn't wait. You learned to work quickly on those days, hoping the priest wouldn't pass by and see you laboring on the Lord's day. The forge demanded constant attention. The fire needed tending, the tools needed maintenance, the workspace needed cleaning, though it never stayed clean for long. Everything was always either falling apart or threatening to. You didn't keep a task list. There was no end to cross items off of. The work simply continued, day after day, year after year, an unending cycle of heat and hammer and smoke. Food, rest, and the body's rebellion. You ate when you could, usually standing up, one hand still holding tongs. Your meals were simple: coarse bread, cold stew, maybe some salted pork if you were fortunate. You ate quickly, mechanically, fuel for the body rather than pleasure. Sleep, when it finally came, was often troubled. Your hands throbbed, your back ached, your shoulders burned. You lay on a straw mattress that was too thin and too lumpy, covered by a rough wool blanket that smelled of smoke because everything you owned smelled of smoke. Your body was breaking down, piece by piece. By age 30, you felt 50. By 40, if you made it that far, you felt ancient. Your knees could barely support you. Your hands shook. Your lungs rasped with every breath. The constant exposure to smoke and heat had taken its toll. But you continued because there was no alternative. This was your trade, your identity, your only means of survival. You had a son now, learning the craft just as you had learned it from your father. You taught him everything: how to read the fire, how to judge the metal, how to swing the hammer efficiently. You saw in his young eyes the same mixture of fear and determination you once felt. You knew his hands would soon be as scarred as yours. His back would curve. His lungs would fill with smoke. The cycle would continue. The legacy. You wouldn't live to old age. Few blacksmiths did. The smoke, the heat, the constant physical strain, it all added up. Your body would give out eventually, probably in your 50s if you were lucky, earlier if you weren't. But your work would remain. The nails in the church door, the hinges on the manor gate, the plow blades in the fields, the horseshoes on the road. Every piece of worked iron in the village carried your touch, your effort, your breath. You were never wealthy. You never owned land. You never had status or titles. But you were necessary. The medieval world ran on iron, and you were the one who shaped it, piece by piece, day by day,
for your entire life. When you were gone, your son would take over the forge. The fire would keep burning. The hammer would keep falling. The smoke would keep rising. And life in the village would continue, built on the foundation of countless small iron pieces, each one shaped by hands like yours. Conclusion: the life of a medieval blacksmith was one of constant labor, physical pain, and quiet endurance. There was no glory, no adventure, just work. Day after day, year after year, standing beside the fire, breathing smoke, shaping iron. It was a hard life, an exhausting life, a life that aged you prematurely and offered little reward beyond survival. But it was also a life of purpose. Every piece you made served a function. Every repair you completed kept the community running. As you drift off tonight, imagine that rhythm. The steady clang of hammer on anvil, the hiss of hot iron cooling, the wheeze of the bellows. Let those sounds carry you gently into sleep. Good night.